now.
I don't see us live yet.
Yep, we're good.
On my end is spinning. No? Okay, yeah, we're live. Where is the window to do the introductions? So let's get started. Welcome everyone to today's Kubernetes office hours. Where we answer your questions live on the air with our Steam panel of experts. You can find us in the office hours Slack channel and check the topic for the URL for the information. Before we begin, let's start introducing ourselves, and then we'll continue. So who wants to start? Let's go with David. I don't know if you're here or here.
Yeah, my name is David Flanagan. I am a developer advocate for an infrastructure as code company called Pulumi, and I spend a lot of my time fixing broken Kubernetes clusters, and I'm excited to help you all today.
And David said, let's do it like this. David said, who goes next?
I will pass the baton to Guy.
I'm Guy Templeton. I'm a principal software engineer at Skyscanner, where I am a member of the team that sort of takes care of our Kubernetes clusters as well as other container platforms. I'm also a co-chair of Kubernetes SIG Autoscale. Paris.
You saw me snapping because I was snapping at Guy's amazingness for leading that SIG. So that was what I was snapping, and look where it got me. Anyway, hello everyone. I am Paris. I sit on the Kubernetes steering committee. I also am an emeritus chair for contributor experience, but I also still do a lot of contributor experience stuff as I am a maintainer for a lot of the sub-projects, which we'll get into in a second. Super excited to be here, and thanks y'all for inviting me to get the word out. Next is Mario. Hello, Mario. Who are you?
Hello,
Tell the world.
It's good to talk to you again. I am nothing really, but I am part of the Michigan crew, the renowned Michigan crew. Some names you might have heard of: George Castro, Bob Killen, Mr. Bobby Tables, Jeffrey Sika, Jiffy. Chris Short, I could keep going. Michigan's great. I am currently a site reliability engineer for a financial services company named Carta. If you have stock options with any organization, you might have used Carta. And so I'm kind of solving cloud native in the financial world, which is incredibly stressful. So I don't have much hair. That's why I'm wearing a hat. Really happy to be here. I've been using Kubernetes since like 1.6 or something crazy. I love the networking side of the table and scalability pieces. So welcoming your questions that hopefully stump us a little bit. I want to pick on Archie next.
Thanks, Mario. Hey, hello, everyone. My name is Archie. I'm CNCF ambassador from Canada. Happy to be here with this amazing crew. I'm organizing the meetups in Canada and also teaching Kubernetes in the university now. And in the free time, I work at Google as an application modernization specialist. So, looking forward to this event.
Hey. Who do you want to pass it? I think we have Chris.
Yeah, my name is Chris Privateer. I work over at Equinix Metal. We do bare metal in the cloud. I've done Kubernetes for a few years before that, and now I get to trip over stuff that David left behind when he left. And one of his coworkers kind of pointed me at this, and it's my first time, so glad to join you all. Thanks for having me on.
Your audio is beautiful.
Oh, good.
Yeah, very perfectly. I need to get a new mic. I think that I'm last. My name is Carlos Santana. I was in a band for 6 years playing the guitar, and not really. I am a senior architect working for IBM Cloud. I help clients and enterprise software, multi-cloud, mostly OpenShift. But I do community work, and one of them is I'm a steering committee member for Knative. That's an open source project that, little secret, is becoming CNCF this week. And the other thing that I do, I run a book club on a weekly basis, the Kubernetes book club. It's not official, so I need to get with contributor X SIG to see if that could be a program that they want to sponsor. And what else do I do? I run a newsletter, and I help people, learn Kubernetes and learn about how to get started.
And it's your
That's for
birthday.
me.
So
What?
happy birthday, Carlos.
Yeah, I'm allowed to do in this world for more than 1 year. So made it through. So with that introduction, so let's get a little bit of the house in order. Also, the other thing that I wanted to help was I'm learning about the release of Kubernetes. So I'm a release shadow and release team for
Awesome.
1.24. So I'm doing PRs on release notes. I'm learning the progress process and meeting a lot of folks. So that's another thing that people can do if they join one of the SIG. So I'm in SIG release right now. You can say as a shadow. And also in helping David, and David been here. I think every episode we shout out to one of the members. I think we missed it last month, but this month I think we choose David as our member of the month on the office hour. He have been doing it for a year hosting this. So and he had a little kid the other day, and I wanted to help out with the community and help hosting these office hours to continue the tradition. So with that, this is a Kubernetes event. So the code of conduct is in effect. Please be excellent to each other. This is a judgment-free zone. Everyone had to start somewhere, like myself and others that didn't know what a container was, right? Many years ago, for some of us. So please help out your buddy having a supporting environment in the channel, in the office hours channel. While we do our best to answer your questions, the panel doesn't have access to your cluster. We'd love to debug your cluster where you can, but we'll do our best to get moving down the next steps. Normally we provide shirts, but I think that's on hold right now. Panelists, you're encouraged to expand on answers with your experience and pro tips. The audience can help by pasting URLs in the office hours channel to the official docs, blogs, anything that is helpful to answer the questions. If you have questions, post them in discusskubernetes.io. If they don't get answered, we'll pick them up for the next month. But usually it's very active. That's where we share a lot of information and get your questions answered. And for the people watching the live stream, you can tweet this, spread the word. Paying it forward. The panel is made of volunteers. If you want to rotate or you want to come in and help, please let us know. We love to have new people and rotate. Like myself, I'm coming in new here. I'm meeting a lot of folks and having fun learning. So with that, let's get started. And one of the things that we're doing with the office hours this year is having a member of a SIG coming for the few minutes at the beginning and tell us about the SIG and what's going on with your SIG. And today we have Paris from the Contributor Experience. Paris.
Hey all, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much. So what I wanted to do today was just talk a little bit about contributor experience. I think that a lot of folks think that we just run events and contributor summits, and that's definitely a part of it. But it's actually a lot more, especially needing of engineering talent to come and contribute to our SIG, because we've run highly trusted roles like GitHub management, and those folks have keys to the entire car. And when I mean car, I mean like over 300 repositories that we manage. And we also do a lot of what I dub community GitOps. So we have a lot of YAML that powers all of our community groups. And that's really how we stay organized. And our crew with ContribEx takes care of all of this and maintains this, and is always looking for not only new contributors, but new maintainers. We're actually in the process of trying to grow more leaders in our group. And these leaders manage over 60,000 contributors, like I mentioned, across 300 repositories. So I just kind of wanted to show you a little bit of lay of our land. So let me share our screen here. So one of our top level things that we manage is this community repo. And obviously the term community is very overloaded in 2022. Like, what does that mean here? And for Kubernetes in this repository, it really means upstream contributors and maintainers and people who are contributing code, documentation, process, programs, etc., to the closest to the maintainer, which is what we dub upstream. And in this is you'll find all kinds of things. So for instance, you'll find our contributor documentation and our contributor guide. So this houses so much of kind of how we are, what we do, why we do it, including at the root with governance, where SIGs are, who SIGs are, how you can find things within the community. And all of this needs maintenance. So you can actually go in and see in each SIG, so I'm going to pick contributor experience just because I'm selfish here, but each SIG has a README and it tells you what exactly they own. And in this case, they own either, like I said, code, docs, process, procedure, something or another, right? And these are all the sub projects that we as community experience run. Oh, and by the way, we are run by two awesome folks that chair us. That's Bob and Allison. And then we do have two awesome tech leads, Christoph and Nikita. So shout out to those folks when you see them. But as far as our sub projects are concerned, some of our biggest ones have to do with community management. And what does community management entail for us here? Pretty much how we communicate. So things like Slack, that has a lot of Slack infra. Slack infra being like customizations that we've made to Slack to help us moderate and all kinds of things that we need engineering support for. And then all kinds of other stuff. So like contributor documentation, like I mentioned before, events, which I've said that a lot of people already know us about because so many of our contributors have come to contributor summits throughout the years. We've had so many, I think it's over 9 now. But the really cool stuff, I think, is really with GitHub management and what we're doing there and the automation of a lot of processes that we have and the collaboration that we do with other SIGs like SIG testing, SIG infra, and trying to automate a lot of the toil that we have with things like our communication pipelines. So the other thing that we're working on this year is this contributor site. We launched this a while ago, and it's pretty much trying to raise all of the documentation that you find in this repository. Because as you can see, this is a lot, right? So how can we organize all of this information to a visible place, right? So this is where we need a lot of UX support, a lot of engineers. So if you're out there, like, how can I help Kubernetes without necessarily, working on features for pods or features for scheduling or whatever it is, right? These are great ways. This is a great way to get involved in the community. Another thing that we're working on is the communication of how we communicate changes with the contributor experience and code of conduct and things like that, right? So another thing we've been looking into is automation of some of this stuff. So this is actually one of the first things that our marketing team has been working on with how can we automate tweets, right? Like how can our community support like the things that we're communicating out, right? Instead of just having one person do it, like for instance, like one social media manager, how can we get out of that like one person doing it paradigm? So this is the kind of stuff that we're working on all year. And we would definitely love to have y'all come out and help us. The cool thing is contributor experience is actually meeting at the top right after office hours. So if y'all are like, hey, I just want to drop into a meeting, that's totally cool. We do introductions for new contributors all the time, and we would love to have you. So we're doing so much stuff this year. I'm really trying to keep the project sustainable and make sure that we're running and growing in the right areas. So yeah, we've got a lot on our plate and would really welcome any support. So get the word out. And thanks.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Paris. One thing that I would say is if you're not aware, your tooling that you're managing is used by other people. So it's open source, it's in GitHub, and people can leverage it. So one example is in Knative, being selfish in talking always about the Knative, but the Knative project, I'm in steering, and I didn't want to invent a new tool to manage G Suite and to manage Slack. So we are currently integrating the Kubernetes tooling to adjust it and configure it and use it in Knative. So as an open source project, you can leverage these tools, and we find things that are quite hard coded for Kubernetes, things like that. We'll submit pull requests or issues saying, if you change this variable or that variable, we'll make it easier for the next project in CNCF to leverage it, right? And that way you get one way of getting maintainers, right, to fix a bug or PRs. So we just wanted to shout out to ContribEx that those tools actually are used beyond Kubernetes.
Thank you. I think our folks love to hear that stuff, honestly. So yeah, and any pull requests that you have from features that y'all have worked on, submit them up to see if it works. That's the whole beauty of open source. So yeah, I'm so pumped to hear that.
And
yes.
I'm working on G Suite because yeah, we don't want to write that code.
Yeah. And so we've got like, I mean, when I tell you hundreds of mailing lists, y'all, I mean hundreds. Like we actually kind of stopped counting at certain points. And these are all hosted on Google groups, and they're all free groups, right? And we're trying to take all of this stuff and put it on the Kubernetes domain. So the first thing that we've recently done is taken Kubernetes-dev at Google groups, which was about 6,000 contributors, and we migrated them to dev at kubernetes.io. So that's just the first thing on our purview there for like automating of all the Google groups. But we have a lot more work to do. And like I said, we could definitely use the support. So this is like great learning too. If you're working for an employer who's, talking about automation and, automating away kind of that toil, this is a great place to learn. So definitely come on down.
Thank you so much for speaking. I know you need to drop, but anyone has any questions to shout out for Paris before she leaves from the panel?
I just
you all know where I live.
Thank you. You've done great work over the years, and Alison and Bob too, and everyone else over at ContribEx.
Yes.
So thanks for all your efforts.
Oh. Yeah.
Thank you so
Shout
much.
out to all of our next leaders, the next leaders that are going to carry us through. So I'm so pumped. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much. And if you want to learn more, all the kas.dev is the hub that I send everyone through. And you will find all the information there on all the SIGs, and ContribEx is one of them. So thank you, Paris. So how are we doing with time? So let's go to the questions. David captured a few of them, and we'll go for the first one. And the first one is from, I'm not pronounce the name, Krishna. So the first one is, to paraphrase, how do we downgrade or maybe install a specific version of Kubernetes with kubeadm? Who wants to help with that? I think Mario and David was laughing about something. It's like, I have something behind me.
No, it was your alarm clock. But I have seen Chris grab his mic, so I guess he wants to tackle this question. No? All right. I could do this one unless someone else is really keen. All right. So kubeadm and kubectl, they're all installed with the versions that they provision themselves. Like, so when you do an apt install, a yum install, a zipper install, a pacman install, whatever your flavor of Linux is, the version of kubeadm that you have on the machine is the version of Kubernetes that will be provisioned when you run the kubeadmin command. So the way that you downgrade or install a specific version of Kubernetes would be just to install the correct version of kubeadmin from the package repository.
And one thing with this question is installing a specific version. If the person doesn't know, right? If you're using apt, you will pass the specific version like kubeadm equals 1.23.2, and you will get that version and get the kubelet that matches that version, and you install a specific version. But a question for you is, or maybe a trick question, is why would you downgrade? And is that a common thing, right? And would you do it in production? And that's the first question. The second question is, can I upgrade or downgrade like multiple minor versions, like going from 1.18 to 1.23, or the proper ways to do it step by step? Anyone knows? So I've done it successfully.
So you can downgrade. I wouldn't say it's encouraged, of course. You know, hopefully you should always.
What could go wrong?
Well, if any of the databasey stuff changes, schemas, paths, anything with etcd, and you're downgrading, then the chances are that there may not be a rollback option for that, or if there is, you potentially lose any data. It's the same problems you would have with your own applications when downgrading. Typically, it's best to try and avoid that as much as possible. But Kubernetes does really well at being backwards compatible. Like, you can have multiple versions of the kubelet in your cluster as you're doing a rolling upgrade process, and that should work relatively well.
Upgrading, you said it. Upgrading is backwards compatible, but if you have an API that comes with Kubernetes that is V1 and you install a bunch of these resources and you want to downgrade where like V1 doesn't exist, it's only beta 1, that's where you get into trouble, right? So I would say just get a new cluster with an old minor version.
Yeah, try not to juggle too many minor versions. Definitely don't be doing any major version juggling unless absolutely required. And Kubernetes supports 3 previous versions, I believe. Like, you could, in theory, you will be getting security patches up to 3 versions back. So.
Or sometimes there are deprecations, something with trying to notify 2-3 releases ahead that this feature will be deprecated, or like some major changes in APIs. This is usually reflected in the release notes. And for the people who missed those and they didn't read it, they get in trouble during the upgrade. It's always recommended to start with the dev clusters, upgrade C, you know, if all APIs are working, and then go to the staging and production clusters to avoid the issues like downgrading stuff.
Well, yeah, we had that massive one recently, right? V1 Beta 1 disappeared. What I think was plenty of warning, but still a lot of people got stung by it. So you do have to read the release notes and changelogs.
Yep. So I'm in 1.24, and that will be the famous version that Docker Shim will be removed for, and people will remember. People are not talking about now, but they will be talking about after April. Next question. I think that's a good one. I think if the person doesn't know that you can specify specific versions to kubeadm, and also it's good to know for the certification exams, there's questions around upgrading and putting specific versions of kubelet in kubeadm. You can get specific versions. The next question is, this is an interesting one. How can I get the host name that my pod is deployed to? I think this is more on the node. How to get the host name of the machine or node in which the node at the pod are deploying Kubernetes. Host IP, we're able to retrieve that by using the environment variables in the YAML. But how do I get the host name of the node? Anyone?
I would, ask like Kelsey Hightower asked, like, why should you care where the pod is running? But I guess there are some use cases still in telecom or potentially some other industries where this is still required. So if this is really needed, I think, this type of information can come from the metrics, from Prometheus, and on your observability tooling, you can probably find those, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if anyone has other ideas.
Yeah, I think the question is more of, for example, if you run, and again, I call it kubectl, you call it banana, kubectl get pod -o wide. that will give you the pods. There will be a column with the names of the nodes. It depends on the Kubernetes cluster, how it was configured. Sometimes the node name will be an IP address. Sometimes the admin can configure the node name to be a host name that matches the operating system host name. And some others will be like a long domain name that display on the node name. So at least I know with few providers that you do kubectl get pod-touch of one, and you will get the IP addresses, and you will know, this is like if you're troubleshooting, like where's my pod is located, like if it's going to the right one or not the right one, and you're trying to troubleshoot. But I think this person is like, that column is displaying an IP address and they want to get the host name. I think that's kind of like a corner case scenario will be like, you will need to like run something on the host node, like kube debug, or like run a pod that has, privilege and host, and get the host name configured in the operating system if you really want it. Or they can just do a DNS, a reverse lookup of that IP to a domain name.
Well, there is also the downward API. So I agree with Archie that like we should hopefully be in a position where our reliance on these variables is at an all-time low and try not to use them. But Kubernetes has a concept of a downward API which will allow metadata from the pod and the node on which you're running to be injected into the container via files or environment variables, which will allow you to get the node name, not necessarily the host name, but you will get what Kubernetes understands to be the name of that node.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying. Like, it depends how you configure that node name, and people by chance could be the host name, or it could be the IP address, or it could be something else. But if they have control over their Kubernetes environment, the answer could be like configure in a way that the node name is the host name, if you care about that thing. But with no more details on like the why, right? Why would you need that information? And also Archie said, like, try not to care where that pod is sitting today, because it might be sitting somewhere else and such. But if you're troubleshooting something, may be useful. So that was a good one. Thank you, Archie, and others to contribute to that one. The other one is okay, so this one it's also recently we did some changes in Kubernetes about this one. It's what is the difference between server-side and client-side apply? If I'm wondering why there's a difference between the usage of dry run in the client and the API. Using the CLI have two dry runs creation modes. You can do a client or server. Must be non-server or client if client strategy only prints an object that will be sent without sending it, and if server strategy, it will submit the server-side request without persisting the resource, which I think the person is answering the question. On the other hand, when sending a dry run request to the API and this is where I'm not sure, API, it only supports all. I would expect that both client and API will support the same dry run creation modes, client, server, and all. I understood the first part. I don't, if somebody has clue about this all in dry run and server-side apply?
That's a tough one.
Anyone? I'm familiar with this one in terms of troubleshooting webhooks. Like if you do the server-side apply to, like, if I'm coding a mutation webhook, validation webhook, I want like to test my code, I will do a dry run server-side to exercise and see the debug in my webhook. If I don't do server and I do client, which are like all the tutorials and everywhere it says you always use client, nothing goes to the API server. It's just the CLI doing its work. But I'm not familiar with the all.
Well, does someone want to explain the difference between client and server-side apply first, and then maybe we can try and work out the dry run? I mean, I'm volunteering not to be it this time.
Yeah, I don't want to be the person always talking. So, anyone? Okay.
I guess I can cover my understanding, and people can shout out when I inevitably get it wrong again. So I think from my view, like the key benefit of server side over client side apply is that you as an end user trying to apply the YAML files to the cluster with client side can end up with your files not actually matching the desired state, the state that is in the cluster. So you can maybe be debugging a problem and going, what have I deployed to the cluster? And it's not actually the state. With server side, there's a couple of changes, but one of them is that one of the benefits is that you end up with up-to-date fields back in your local files. And if you try and then apply that, whereby the fields don't actually match what the server has, rather than previously you just not being informed of that. Instead, the server will come back and tell you. You can then, or you'll get a conflict and you can choose conflict. Right, there's a number. I can't remember how many different conflict resolution methods are supported these days, but you can choose a resolution method for the server to deal with those conflicts then. But like back in client-side days, instead, you'd just get that applied, and you'd be overwriting other resources. So say you and another developer on your team are trying to develop different things, or are working on the same thing, doing different changes to values, you end up fighting between the two of you, as opposed to sort of making the server making that explicit.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, it's very, and that's why it's very common in like tutorials and things like that. You want like the minimum YAML, right? You do the client side of a pod that you put like, this is the container that I want to run. But actually the server, when you send it to the server, it would start inserting all these defaults, like the service account, the security group, everything else. And maybe you don't want the hard-coded thing in your Git, right? Configuration. So
I think
can we go to the
only thing that wasn't mentioned there was when we use server-side apply, we get the managed fields annotations from the server, so you can actually track which client or operator, process, etc. Is responsible and owns certain fields within the spec, which can be useful for debugging.
Yeah, and for people that are like have a long history with Kubernetes, it used to be a time that when you do kubectl apply, that information, the client did all the things that would be the differences and put it into an annotation. Then later, I want to say maybe 1.18 or 1.18, it was a server-side apply, and then it was the managed field. Because if you had like a controller, let's say something like Argo or somebody that is managing that resource, and also kubectl does a change to it, they're fighting over a field, like number of replicas. So the managed field was a way of delineating, I own the replica count, and then this other controller owns another piece of the spec, and that information is managed field. And the feedback from the community, some feedback was like, I hate managed fields, like all this clutter of the managed fields. And of course, we created plugins, right, to delete it because we didn't want to see it. But it was useful information in terms of managing, having like two controllers or two things controlling one resource and different parts controlled by two controllers. And kubectl is a controller, right? It's like controlling it with it's a client.
Yep, perfect.
I'm still lost on the all. I'm not. I don't know what dry run, but I don't know what all means.
Well, I was wondering, there's another aspect of the client-server differences I was wondering that comes into play or not. When you have a client-side apply and you have like webhooks that trigger about admissions or certain things that are allowed, the client can't check those, right? You'd have to have a servant side to even check those. So I would think some of your, depending on what you're submitting, if you don't do a server side dry run, it's not valid at all.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said that my example of like when I was writing a little mutation webhook, actually was the one for Clusterlet that I created for David. The way to debug it was like, force it to go to the server side, but I didn't want to create the resource. I just wanted to check my code to exercise it. So it was a dry run, hit the server, do all the validation, authentication, mutation, and give me back the resulting thing of like all these mutation webhooks doing stuff to the CR. And then I see like, my code actually did the mutation that I wanted to debunk, David. Yes. Shall we continue?
Yeah, I think if there's any follow-ups on that question, Anita, please let us know, and we can try to connect you with the right people as well to talk.
Yeah,
about
and David put a link to the docs saying when you set the dry run equals all, and it goes with a long explanation on that. So maybe we can put that link into there. I don't want to read this live here, understand it, but the dry run all is a we'll read more on that. So moving along, I'll say another good question from Jorge. Do you any more thoughts on dry run? It's very useful to get the YAML back in the certification exams. If you're studying for your CKID, CKA, you become friends with the kubectl and dry run. And it's a good way to get the right version of the YAML that is matches your version of Kubernetes, right? Some people ask me like, what YAML do I use? Like, I'm not trying to get documentation. I'm just going to use the one that the cluster gives me back. So the next one is, do you split? This is a good one. Do you split an application across multiple clusters? Why and when? So the actual question is, hi all. New to Kubernetes, here and still working on learning, structuring, architecting it. One of the reasons we are interested in Kubernetes is not just as a great way to scale our custom applications, but also because we feel this would be a great way to help us scale, maintain some portions of application infrastructure. Great use case for Kubernetes, by the way. Things like RabbitMQ, Kafka, etc. I'm guessing that is like stateful things, right? Databases. For those type of components that are not strict applications or services, do you deploy them to their own separate cluster, or do you mix them in as just delineate among namespaces or something like that? So I think it's around guidance when, if you have like let's take RabbitMQ and Kafka, do you deploy it in a separate cluster or on the same cluster with the app? And why and when?
I think he means also like in general, like multi-tenancy question, like would you do this, Kubernetes multi-tenant, why and when? So I think it's a very big topic, but like, I don't know, like I think it might be also the answer depends where the person who is trying to run applications sitting, if he's sitting on-prem on bare metal, or if he's sitting in the cloud. I think the answer could be slightly different as well. So like, I don't know, maybe we should take it like on cloud or versus on-prem, when and how.
I think it's more on databases, right? Like to pinpoint on he's worried about, do I put my RabbitMQ, my Kafka, or my SQL, do I run it on the same cluster with the apps? I'm meaning apps, these are the stateless ones. Or is it better to run it on a separate cluster, regardless if they're multi-cloud or not, like two clusters sitting together, or one cluster or two clusters like right next to each other?
Yeah. Anyone wants to take it? I have a lot of things to say, but I want
to go ahead, Chris.
My first thought is always don't run the database in the Kubernetes if you don't have to, honestly. But I've done this both ways. Like I've had the multi-tenancy thing with the app and the database and the cluster. I've had it where they're split out. It's really down to how you manage things. What's your GitOps strategy? Are people developing in this cluster? Because if they are, you probably don't want production apps also in the same cluster. It's so situational.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, absolutely. This is
before everyone answers, it depends. So that's no one can use it depends. That's like to the architect saying like to the consultant.
This is the insurance agent when you call them and that you say, is this covered? And they say it depends, right? They don't give you a definitive answer. So I come at this from kind of a network performance perspective. There's latency to be considered here, right? If you have something in another cluster, you're traversing from one cluster to another, maybe hopping multiple times. Maybe you're in the same region, maybe you're not. Availability zones, right? There might be latency involved. So all the other answers are correct, but this is another factor that you need to consider in for your application. I've worked in environments with like GraphQL and with payment processing where like that they actually are very sensitive to latency. And so that's something that has to be evaluated. I will say as well, and I think we all know this, any pattern is basically supported. You're supported whether or not you want to run it as a sidecar, whether or not you want to run it in its own namespace, whether or not you want to run it in a different cluster. You can use Linkerd, you can use Cilium to connect those clusters together. Like there's so many different options now. So I think a lot of it is what works for you, what is easy to manage long term, how do you measure, and what does your observability look like? And then the long term like maintenance, security, support. Is your team ready to take this on in terms of managing multi-cluster communication? That's a whole nother journey for a lot of organizations, right? So like it's such a multifaceted answer, and there's no right or wrong way. It really depends on your organization. So I can say for the most part, like in development environments, we actually like to keep for what we do in our use case, we like to keep things close with the workload and let developers actually in their own ephemeral environments. And so we like to use vCluster and from Loft, which is a great tool, and use our clusters a little bit more densely, right? And so we're not worried about spawning clusters and low-level infrastructure pieces. We have a few clusters that do many things and are nimble in that way. And our developers, we give them that tool set. And then for production workloads, we'll have a more secure, definitive template focused, maybe an RDS instance or Elasticache, whatever the database type of thing might be with the infrastructure component. And we do some testing of that as well, because again, there's latency. That's a different sort of thing than a Redis instance in your local ephemeral environment, right, in Kubernetes. So again, like testing as you graduate things up to production is really important here. So I'll shut up now.
I love this question.
Yeah, so I agree with you. The first thing to think about is your requirements, and the thing that that's why I was saying like the two clusters like right to each other, right? If you have two nodes that are like sitting to each other, it just happen to belong to different clusters. That'll be the clusters that you will get to that communication between the app talking to Rabbit. Its performance is the first one. Like if that doesn't work for you because it's too slow, then maybe you go and have the both pods sitting on the same node. That you need that performance, like IPC communication, that your web app is talking to the database. Both pods are sitting on the same node, so it's almost IPC communication, and all the data is almost cached in memory, right? That would be like the ultimate requirement. Like this person needs the highest performance possible, but then you pay the price, like that tight binding over there. If you don't have that requirement, like the latency, the performance, and these things be together, you can have them together in the cluster that is going to be the prod 1, prod 2, prod 3, but the other ones, staging, dev, right? You can have them separately. I would tend to say that the next level between performance is organization, people, and people roles. So I've talked to people roles that is like this team over there with that VP and that director. They manage databases and they're DBAs and they're experts on databases and performance of databases, tuning the storage, the backups and DRs and all that. And I have come to situations where I say like, well, maybe that team should have a cluster themselves, manage the data, the Kafka cluster, the RabbitMQ cluster, and offer the apps team as a service, a database as a service, a RabbitMQ as a service. And then the apps team says like, I need a Kafka server. I don't know where it is. So this other team is going to offer it. They just happen to have that cluster, and then the apps team have their cluster. So both can have different versions for Kubernetes. Both can have like their own life cycle of updating things. Because that's where it gets into trouble. Like this team wants to update Kubernetes version, and this team is like, we're not ready yet. So if you have the different versions for Kubernetes, like 122 versus 123, then it's an org and the people responsibilities. At the end of the day, maybe the two clusters are sitting in the VPC, the same VPC, and they're like very connected, but they manage differently by different teams, and that I would say put them in different clusters, not because of the cluster, but because of the people and the managing. Like that team is going to offer you a SaaS solution, but it's maybe sitting in bare metal, but it's often going to offer you a SaaS solution of a database of that stateful thing. And the apps team is like, I just need an API and a key to access the database, and I don't care what that thing is running. And for dev, they can run in the same namespace, right? So I would shut up and now. I don't know if that was useful or not. Any thoughts on that? Because I like clusters to be throwaway. I want to treat them like throwaway. Like even for that team that managed the RabbitMQ, is like, yeah, just throw away the cluster and get a new one. You should have like that storage somewhere, right? And get a new version. Everything should work, infrastructure code, everything defined as infrastructure as code. But not all teams have that level of expertise, right? So hopefully that helps. But for the dev and the Minikube, you don't have to have two clusters. Just put them together to develop your app.
I don't think I've really got much more to add on in terms of the like making choices about how to divide applications. But I think one thing that's worth thinking about, and obviously far harder for stateful stuff, is like that where your fault zones are and how tolerant you are to failures. Or, you know, if you're working on a platform team like I do, how do you ensure that you can take clusters down for downtime, still have resiliency to like failures, whether it's hardware or cloud provider or networking, and still have, you know, enough of an application able to serve data or serve requests, etc. And that's obviously really hard to do for databases. For stateful microservices, generally pretty easy, but then maybe that feeds into your decision about where you're locating your databases if you've got your application spread across 3 clusters already.
Yeah, and then for the apps team or the stateless apps team, I always encourage, if that cluster of Kafka, RabbitMQ, or, you know, database is in the same, happen to be in the same cluster, treat it as it's not in the same cluster. Don't assume that is you can use the DNS or a solution as a service local, right? If you treat it as, yeah, my app just needs a secret and it has the connection information in there, it might be a service name or service IP, and it's maybe in the same namespace, but maybe in a few months, it could be a SaaS container, right? Serverless containers, that's a thing. And you just have the connection information to a database or RabbitMQ. And that app may not be running Kubernetes. It may be running something on top of Kubernetes as a SaaS. So it's easier to move that container around if you treat your connection information as configuration information. It could be secret or config maps, and not assume that it's going to be like my namespace.service.cluster.local, right? Or db that using that DNS resolution is to mine. So you have the option later of running the database in dev in the same cluster, or running in production in a separate cluster, or maybe the app ends up running in something that is on top of Kubernetes as a SaaS.
We have.
I think that's the last question.
Yeah, and we're out of time. All right, great commentary there, Carlos. That was really, really insightful. Thanks for sharing.
So office hours is going to be continuing in that time zone now, right? In that time slot in the future.
At this time slot, yes, I think this works well for Europe and most of the US, and we'll look at alternative options, because we're supposed to be running a US one, EU one, but you know it's difficult to manage and operate. So this slot works well for both, and if we get any interest from APAC and other areas, then we'll do our best to try and get something scheduled for there. But this is our new time slot, yeah.
Cool.
So with that, I think we end. And feel free to hang out in our office hours afterwards in the Slack channel. There's always people there. And we'll be back at the same time next month. And if you were in Pacific time and you were complaining that this session was too early for you, now you can be at it'll be 7 a.m. your time, so you can bring your coffee and breakfast and watch the office hours. You cannot complain now, right? So with that, we'll end. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the panel, as always.
All right. Bye all.
Thanks. Nice to see everyone.
Everybody, have a good day.
Yeah.